The White Unicorn, Bedtime Short Stories for Kids, a collection of fantasy and classic stories with 101 positive affirmations to help children fall asleep and relax. Aesop's Fables and Fairy Tales, written by Martha Shannon, narrated by Tippy Robinson and Dona Jackson. Part 1. Bedtime Stories for Kids.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when the flakes were falling, there lived a beautiful princess who lived with her father and stepmother up in the fortress as her birth mother had passed away. Her dad told her everybody to be fair in court with his son. He asked them, "Who has got a problem? Nothing is more critical than real." She went to the magic mirror at her first chance. "What is that?" the queen said on a wall. "Who is just right?" "The fairest of all is Snow White," he said. "What's that?" The queen's stepmother. "Who is this to her husband?" The wonder magic said. "Mirror on the mirror," said the queen, "which is the most appropriate one among them?" The queen yelled, "What's that? Nobody's more honest than I," that the queen must have the best of all. "What could be fairer than that? You are the mirror. What do you know?" Magic Spiegel repeated. The queen had still been humbled. She was so distraught that once in a while the queen decided to get rid of the baby. "I can't wait again." She's been so distressed that she decided once and all to get rid of it. She said, she said, she said. The queen called her servant a huntsman. She said she pointed to the maid's long finger. The queen said, "I'll get rid of this girl once and for all." But the queen was she, and what would she do? See how we can get Snow White deep into the depths of the wildwood. The next day, Snow White was taken deep into woods by the huntsman, and he drew his knife to kill her. The princess started weeping and begged the huntsman to spare his life. "Look," Snow White said, pulling something from her pocket. He kept himself in front of him 6 beautiful arrowheads that she had carefully designed. She said, "Snow White," said the huntsman, "this is for you. We've never been so lovely to me. We love them, and you love them too. What can you do?" "I can't," the huntsman replied. "Snow White, I can't," he said. "Snow White, I cannot, I cannot, I cannot, I cannot." To his knee the servant dropped. "The queen, the stepmom, was ordered to kill you," he responded. Snow White yelled, "What did she do?" The bugger said, "You need to get out of here and fast. Your life is in danger." Snow White went as fast as she could and ran into the woodlands. "All over the country then, and don't go into the castle." The deeper and deeper she was going. The wolves began to whisper, and it became mysterious. She was fooling, and her dress was torn. The tree seemed to be lifted from the ground by tall branches. She was bitten, hemorrhaged, and terrified. However, she went on and on. The wolves started to whisper, but it became dark. There was a glow in the distance instantly. What lay deep down the forest? She moved towards the direction of the light and saw it was a building. Nevertheless, there was no sound in the house, but only lit up the windows. She said, softly knocked at her window. "Good morning? Good morning." No response. The gate was not shut. She pushed it wide open and went into it. She looked up. "Oh, is somebody back home?" She looked around. What a mess! What a mess! What a disaster! In the whole of her life, she had never witnessed such untidiness. "This cottage might be the biggest mess I ever saw," she said. "It's a tower over your head tonight, though. Maybe I can get my bed here if I clean it up. What a mess! What a mess!" She was thinking of someone she missed when she was sleeping. She and a prince who lived in the next kingdom were very pleased to meet each other until their father had remarried. One of the dwarfs said the name of Doc. "With such a more magical thing, I'm not worried." "We should look better upstairs." Another wave of the dwarfs. "Everything's fed up, it's clear." A young dame was lying down on all her beds, sleeping comfortably. "Who are you?" There was a wave from a group of other dwarfs. "Are you? Who are you?" The 7 dwarfs could say they're just as surprised, and they're all so happy that they all told their tale. The little 7 dwarfs had interesting names. Bashful, Doc, Dopey, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, and Sneezy. All the dwarf people said right away. A young woman was lying down across her beds and slumbering comfortably. They would tell they were just as shocked. They all told their stories immediately. "You have already cleaned up our place," Sneezy said. "It's going to be easier to keep the house clean," said Snow White. "As long as we all pitch in, we're going to be easy. And of course, I will also do my share. I'll let everyone know which part they may do." Snow White said, "But I can do something else for you." "Absolutely," said Happy. The 7 dwarfs laughed. "Who can you read? Do you know? Who can you read?" "Doc told me that we'd like these books to read," he said. "These books we got lots of wonderful tales, and that we'd love to read them. Maybe Snow White should teach them lessons to learn." The young princess and the little fellas jumped and sang with happiness for their new friendship during the night. The 7 dwarfs warned Snow White not to open a door the next day before they left to work. The most realistic of them all is Snow White. Mirror, a mirror on a wall. Saying the magic of the fairy, "That's doubtful," the queen screamed. "The lady's no longer alive." The magic mirror said, "White snow lives." In the snow-white mirror in the house of 7 dwarfs, an object was presented. The queen's orange strength. She yelled, "We are living in Snow White." She will not get back. In the house of the dwarves, the 7 dwarves left to work in the morning, knocking at the door. "Who is that?" the Wonder Fairy asked. "Who is that? Who is it?" The squirling speech, selling apples came. "It's just the poor older woman." But she went as a bad Reina dressed like an old lady. "My dear, one here reigns," the old woman said in the window. "Show the lovely red apple." And, as you suspected, she put the red one in a covering. Snow White said that. They had a recollection of the 7 dwarfs' warning that no one was to open the door. "Just let me go," answered Snow White. "It was the evil queen, dishing like an old woman. to go door to door to sell apples in the rain, then went ahead and unbolted the door to let her in. And Snow White had no suspicion, but stood before her and let herself be laced with the new laces, holding the lace and tightly that the Snow Blue lost her breath, and she dropped off like she was dead. Snow White didn't dream of any malice. "Your beauty is over," said the spiteful queen, and went home. "They are all stunning." Not long afterward, in the evening, the 7 dwarfs came home. But how shocked they were when they saw their dear little Snow White lying on the ground, and that she neither stirred nor moved and seemed to be dead. They lifted her from the ground, and when they saw she was laced tightly, they quickly loosened it, and she was able to breathe and came back to herself. Then the younger widow said, "The old woman was the queen. Take care of her for yet another time, and let no one in when we're back." As the wicked woman had reached her home, she went straight to the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" And the mirror replied, "Oh, dear queen, you are beautiful, but over the hills where the dwarfs dwell, Snow White lives on, and well, she is the fairest of them all." All her blood rushed to her heart with fear, as she saw plainly Snow White was still alive. Therefore, with the help of witchcraft, she was able to make a poisonous comb, and she disguised herself yet again to like an old woman, however different from before, so she took the poisoned comb with her. When she entered the cottage of the dwarfs, she knocked at the door and yelled, "Fine goods!" And Snow White said, "I will not let anyone." "I suppose you can look," said the old woman, and pulled the poisonous comb out and lifted it up, and gave her the one that was poisoned. And the little girl looks so beautiful that she takes it up, places it in her hair, and tries it. But when it hits her face, it has become so heavy that it falls senseless. "You could lie there," the queen said, and she left. Nevertheless, the dwarfs returned happily very early that evening, but they wondered what had happened as they found the princess lying as I'd dead on the ground, and soon discovered the poisonous comb. She recovered and told all that was passing by when they took it away, and she was warned once more not to open the door for any stranger. The queen went in front of the mirror and asked, "Who is the most beautiful of them all?" And he received the same answer as before, and that made her shiver with anger. "The princess is going to die," she cried, "even if it costs me my life." She then went secretly to the room and prepared a poison apple. "I don't let anyone in, as dwarfs have told me." "Do as you will," said the wicked lady, "but in all circumstances, take this pretty apple. I will make a gift of it." "I don't dare to make this pretty apple, and I'll make it for you," Snow White said. "I don't dare to take it as a present." "What are you scared of?" asked the woman. "Is that tainted, do you think? Come, come, come. The apple was well cunningly crafted, that only the red part was poisoned. I will divide it into 2 halves. You will get to eat the red cheek, as I eat the white part of the apple." And Snow White was tempted to try, because the apple looked sweet, and the young girl couldn't help herself when she saw the older woman eating. But when she fell dead on the ground, she could hardly put the piece in her mouth. She then stared at the princess horribly and busted into laughter. "The dwarves will not bring you back to life this time around," said the old woman. "Snow as white, red as blood, black as ebony wood. When the queen got home, she went in front of the mirror and asked, "Who is the most beautiful of most all?" The mirror responded, "You, the queen, are the most beautiful of them all throughout the lands." The dwarfs, when they came home that evening, found the princess lying on the floor. Her lips were not breathing, and they were afraid that she was dead. The little men picked her up and tried to figure out what poison the old woman used this time. They unlaced her, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but it was no use. The little princess died and remained dead. Then they put her on a table, and they mourned for a consecutive 3 days. And they had suggested to bury her deep into the darkness of the ground, but thought otherwise, as her cheeks were red, and she looked much alive to them. So they made a transparent casket, where they laid her to rest, and she could be seen clearly from all sides. On the side of the casket, her name was encrypted in golden letters, and it was indicated that she was the daughter of a king. And then the sarcophagus was on the mountain, and one of the dwarfs stood around and watched. And the air birds even came and shouted in the name of Snow White. First, a crow came, then a bird, and then a dove finally came. For a long time the princess remained dead, though she looked much alive, as she was white as snow, red as blood, and hair as black as the ebony woods. It so happened that the king's son came into the forest and sought shelter in the dwarf's house. Then he saw the casket up in the mountains of the dwarfs, and there the Snow White laid. He was taken awe. He read the words engraved on it in golden letters. The young prince pleaded with the dwarfs to hand him the casket, and in exchange they can have whatever they want. However, the dwarfs turned down the offer, and they said to him, "We won't trade her, even for all the riches in the world." Then the king's son begged them to give her as a gift, as she can't live without the beautiful princess. He swore to take care of her as a dear possession. The king's son instructed his servants to carry the princess in their shoulders carefully, and it so happened they stumbled upon huge roots of a tree, and it shook the casket. Shockingly, the poisonous piece of apple the princess had bitten came out. Snow White opened her eyes and pulled up the top of the casket and sat upright. She was once again alive. "Where am I? Where are you taking me?" she asked. The prince was filled with joy and happiness, and she told her, "You are with me, my dear princess." He told her the events that unfolded up to where they were now. The king's son proclaimed his love to her and asked for her hand in marriage, and off they went to the prince's palace. Snow White willingly agreed to accompany the prince to his father's castle, and they did a big wedding that was heard of over the lands. The Escapades of the Little Mouse. In the olden days, there lived a tiny hazel field mouse. One bright sunny afternoon on Saturday, he went out to the fields to see what he could find there. There was nothing in particular that he was looking for. He just felt like he needed to get some fresh air and just maybe stumble upon some goodies that he would like. He was running and playing along the well-trimmed green grass, poking his nose in everything that he came in contact with. It was a good day for him. You could tell from his face he was jovial, as he fooled around by himself. He was throwing glances all over the place with his 2 eyes, and that's when he had a glimpse of the smooth, glowing acorn lying there on the grass. It was a spectacular and outstanding glowing tiny acorn, and he had thoughts of taking it back with him at home. Therefore, he put his paws out to reach it. Unfortunately, the little acorn rolled over and further away out of his reach. He couldn't let it go. It was such an amazing piece that the thought of losing it didn't settle well with him. Hence, he ran after it, but it kept on rolling and rolling without stopping, just in front of him. Shortly ahead of him, a massive oak tree with roots scattered across the soil rolled over it. There was an oak tree. It rolled under a huge round root. The tiny mouse followed the acorn and stuck his nose under the acorn and could see a little round hole on the surface. He wondered what could be inside there, a hole in a root. That interested him a lot, and more than ever, he became as curious as a cat. He managed to slip into the hole and saw a flight of stairs descending into the earth. Just ahead of him, he could still see the shiny acorn rolling down the stairs with a soft tapping sound. Then he decided there was no harm in continuing his chase, so down he went too. The corn rolled down, 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 and the field mouse also went down, 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 together with it, until on the spur of the moment at the end of the stairs, he saw a tiny little door. He was astonished, and his brain blown out of this world. How did this get here? He thought to himself. Well, he was already there. There is no turning back. His 2 tiny eyes were focused on the gold in front of him. That was all that mattered at the moment. The gleaming acorn trolled over to the entrance of the house and gave it a hard bang against it with a tap. In the blink of an eye, the field mouse saw the door opening pretty quickly, and inside went the acorn. The field mouse hastened down his little paws down the last stairs as quickly as possible and pushed through the door just on time before it closed up. The door closed behind him, and he found himself standing in a small room, and a queer little red man stood there in front of him. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, and what in the world had he gotten himself into? He stood there, staring at the little red man, and he received the same stare from his host. The little red man was dressed all in red, from his cap, jacket, to his pointed shoes at the front. He said to the field mouse, "You are my prisoner." "And why should I be your prisoner?" asked the little mouse. "Because you want to steal my little shiny acorn," said the little red man. "Hey, you there," said the field mouse. "I am the one who found it. That means it belongs with me." "Stop kidding yourself. It isn't yours," cried out the little red man. "I have it with me, and it ain't coming out of this house. You will get to say it ever again." The small mouse took a long look around the tiny little chamber, rather quickly in search of the acorn, but he could see no acorn in the entire room. Then he thought, instead of staying there and arguing with the little red man, he saw it wise to go up the tiny flight of stairs and where he came from. However, there was no way out. The little man had already looked at his tiny door. He then said to the little horrified mouse, "You will be my servant. "You're the one to take care of my little house, from neatly making my bed, sweeping and dusting the entire room to preparing my meals. You should know I love myself some delicious broth." And just like that, the small hazel mouse became the servant of the little man, and each day he took care of the little man by ensuring the house is well kept and prepare his favorite broth for dinner. As for the little man, routinely left in the morning and didn't return until much later on in the afternoon. There was only one problem. He never left the door unlocked. Each time he left, he locked and carried the keys along with him. The little field mouse was no longer a free bird. He was being held captive with some strange-looking little fella who was not willing to let him go. But, he thought, why am I being locked in here? Didn't he take the shiny little acorn? Am not in its possession. Come to think about, actually, I never even got the chance to hold it. All it did was just roll and rolled many times. One chilly morning, after being held for a very long time, the little red man was in such a hurry when he was leaving that day, he forgot to close the door. And because of his haste, he was quick to turn his key before the door, which did not completely lock it, of course. He left without noticing the blunder he had done, and I stood in the middle of the tiny room and thought, for sure, hurry has no blessing. Indeed, this was a good sign for the little field mouse. A good opportunity had presented itself, and he was not about to let it pass him by. He had dreamed of this day every time he swept the tiny room, made the bed, and cooked broth for this wicked little man. He yearned for his freedom. He had missed his old life, living carefree, enjoying each day with gratitude, like there is no tomorrow. Immediately, the little field mouse saw a window of opportunity to run away from this prison and go back to his happy home. It was time to go back home, where he felt appreciated and loved, rather than being here and being taken advantage of. He pictured himself seated at the corner of his house, enjoying a hot beverage in the evening as the sun sets. Except there was one problem. He was not going to leave that room without the tiny, good-looking acorn. He just had to have it. The little field mouse said to himself, I wouldn't have passed through all this for nothing. The acorn was his. At this moment he cared less of the little red man with his pointed shoes remarks. He had no clue where it might be hidden, so he set out to look everywhere without leaving any place unturned. Each little drawer had the little mouse open it and checked in all of them, but there was nothing in the drawers. He looked over every cabinet, and it was neither there. He looked up, saw a wee door at the fireplace, after a long hunt that he almost gave up. He climbed up the chair and opened the door, and alas, it was right there, beaming on his face with the white light. He took it hurriedly, put it in the forepaws that helped him put in his mouth, and ran away. He opened the little door, climbed up the small steps, and ran through the hole under the root and into the fields, finally returning home. He felt some type of satisfaction inwardly that he had not felt in a very long time. He stood there for some time before coming down, and took one last long look at the tiny room, being glad that it was the last time being locked in that sham. All this suffering was all because of you, he said to the little acorn. But hey, it was all worth it. I will be trapped over and over again if need be, for you, no regrets at all. He took the glowing acorn by the forepaws, after which he was able to put it in his mouth, and came down from the chair onto the floor. He had gone with nothing at the little red man's home, so he would leave with nothing but his precious acorn, which it was stolen from him. He hurriedly left the place before the little red man could return and still find him there. With huge relief, he pushed open the little door, and he was finally a free little field mouse. He went up, up, up the tiny little flight of stairs, up to the utmost first stair, and just as he came in, with the pretty little acorn, he came out the same he had come in, under the massive oak tree. Immediately he was out of the hole. He ran as fast as his feeble paws would allow him, and ran across the large fields, and finally he could see his own home. He was filled with joy, and that made him run even faster, and he reached soundly in his home. Inside his house, he placed the beaming acorn rather hard on the tabletop. What he saw made his face glow with amusement and a tingling sensation in his heart. Just as he placed the acorn, it snapped open like a little gift box. How wonderful this was, he thought. How was this even possible? Could this be something else other than what I had presumed it to be? Are you wondering what was inside the little shiny gift box? Inside was a tiny, beautiful, glowing necklace. It was the prettiest and best-looking piece of gem that he had never ever in his entire life seen such a spectacular thing. And something surprising, it was just big enough, actually the right size for his baby sister's neck. Therefore, the little field mouse gave it to her as a little gift from him to her. His little mouse sister really appreciated the gift and thought of it as perfectly lovely. And when the little necklace was not on her neck, the little mouse sister would store it safely in the shiny acorn box. She was grateful and thankful, and she made sure her big brother knows of it. The little field mouse appreciated that a great deal. In the evening, when the little red man went home, he was caught by surprise, seeing the door to his little house open. Instantly he knew his prisoner was no more with him. He stood there at the last staircase for a while, shocked, and wondered what happened. And then it dawns on him. He must have left the door open. And the little red man never knew what had become of it, because the little field mouse did not know where the little field mouse resided. The Castle of Fortune. Two tourists took off on a trip one beautiful summer afternoon just as the sun rose. They were both youthful people of great strength, but one was a lazy man and the other a hard-working fella. When the first rays of the sun went across the mountain, they shone on the highest level, as far as their eyes could see, in the wonderful castle. The castle was magnificent and gorgeous, the towers glowing like bronze, and the windows gleaming like crystal. The two youthful people gazed at it anxiously and looked forward to going close to it. Unexpectedly, from far away, they could see something like a large white and gold butterfly swept towards them. And as it got closer to them, they were astonished in what they saw. She was the fairest of them all, with the most beautiful face, covered up in a white robe that swayed gloriously as lovely as cobwebs, with a crown so shining upon her head that nobody can say whether it was diamonds or dew. "Follow me," ordered the beautiful woman. The lazy person sat down with an unhappy sigh in the grass. "She's got a simple time," he said. But the outgoing and hard-working guy went after the beautiful woman and got a hold of her robe that was dragging on the ground. "Who are you, and where do you go?" he inquired. The gorgeous lady looked up to him and said, "This here is my castle, and I am the Fairy of Fortune. If you want, you can achieve it today. There is time if you don't waste it. I will meet you there, and will be your buddy if you can get to it before the final midnight stroke. But after midnight, if you arrive a second later, it will be too late." When she said this, the traveler's grip on the robe let loose and off she went. The hardy guy rushed back and informed his lovely buddy what the woman had told him. "The thought," uttered the sluggish guy as he chuckled hysterically. "No doubt there would be some opportunity if a body had a horse, but go all that way? No, thank you." I did let that pass, and he left on the path to the brilliant castle, a nice and constant step, with his eyes directly ahead. He walked on his way to the castle and said, "I'm off," to his friend. The lazy guy lay in the soft grass and stared at the far towers with some wisdom. "I wish I could get a hold of a good horse," he thought. He felt something warm just at that moment, and he heard his shoulder whimpering a little. He turned around, and there was a little pony. The animal was gentle and well-built, saddled and bridled. It was a pet tender. "Hi, hi! More than often, opportunity comes when no one expects," the lazy guy said, and he jumped on the horse immediately and guided it to a fortune castle. The little horse began to catch up with the other travelers in just a few minutes in, and passed them as they walked to the tower. "How do you love your Shanks mare?" the sluggish guy giggled as he went past the buddy. The hard-working guy shook his head and held his gaze directly forward steadily. During sunset, the towers of the castle were striking to the eye, far closer and lovelier against the heavens. The horse maintained its excellent speed. Precisely at noontime, the horse switched off the path and paused in a shady grove on a mountain. "Wise animal," his horse said, "haste creates garbage, and in moderation all things are easier." He was dismounting and seated down with his back against a tree in the refreshing moose. "I would follow your instance and drink and rest a bit. I will follow your advice." He had dinner in the pouch of his traveler and comfortably ate it. Then, from heat and the first riding, he positioned himself for a nap and put his hat over his eyes. To a little reminder, it's going to all go easier. It was a dormant thing. He slept as the 7 sleepers and dreamt of the gorgeous stuff you could possibly imagine. He finally dreamed of entering the castle and receiving it with excellent parties. He took everything he wished, and music performed in his honor during the fireworks. He wakened so loudly the music, he ended up scratching his eyes, and watch, the last moments of the sunset were the light, and the sound was the voice of the other voyager who passed through the forest at foot. The lazy person said, "Time to be off," and stared for a beautiful horse about him. It wasn't discovered a horse. An ancient, funny, gray goat was the only thing nearby. The guy called, whispered, and saw, but there showed no little horse. He gave it up for a lengthy time, and as there was nothing better to do, he rode and put off the ancient gray horse. It started darkening now. The light started showing in the castle windows, so the problem fell. The black donkey came faster and easier, slower and easier, until he paused and sat at the center of the field. He couldn't take any steps to coax and chastise his rider and beat them. Eventually, the rider kicked and punched the animal, and the donkey thought, enough is enough. His front hooves were high up, the head came down, and the slothful guy walked over it on rocky soil. He was there for several minutes, because I can assure you it wasn't a gentle location. How he wanted it to be in his smooth, hot sleep, safe in beds with his sorrowful bones. It reminded him of the Castle of Luck itself, because he realized there had to be nice rooms. He was even prepared to rub his broken arms in these rooms, so he got up and longed for the donkey around him. It didn't find a donkey. The faint-hearted man crawled around when he fell. His hands shrugged at his stumps and ripped his face in the briars. His knees hit the stones. But there was no donkey. He had been sleeping again, but now he could hear the hungry wolves in the forest. This didn't sound nice. His hand finally hit something like a saddle. Fortunately, he grabbed it and began mounting his ass. The animal he carried was very tiny, and he thought his shoulders were wet and slimy. When he was mounting, he thought, he was shuddering and reluctant, but he heard a remote clock strike at that time. Only 11 were hitting. There was still time, but not more than enough, to achieve the castle, so he set up his fresh steed and continued to travel. The pet was simpler to sit on than the donkey, and behind the saddle it seemed extremely heavy. The fresh steed was lighter than it, but he pressed his way out of the forest into the open after a while, and only a little distance ahead of him sat the castle. All its windows had lamps flashing. The lazy man's beast dropped from a ray, and he saw what he was chasing, a gigantic snail, as big as a catfish. The house of this lazy man had a freezing shake, and then and there he would come out of his awful pet, but the clock struck again. In the middle of the night, it was the first of a long and slow attack. When he heard it, the guy grew frenzied. In order to make him rush, he rode his heels on his sides. The turtle grew immediately in his face, folded up in his shell, and gave the poor guy a pile on the earth. Twice it hit the clock. If the guy ran to it, he could still have achieved the palace, but he was still sitting and yelling at a horse instead. An animal, an animal, he lamented. Any kind of animal that's going to take me to the castle. 3 times the clock ticked, and when it hit the 3rd time, there went something rushing and tumbling in the shadows, like a horse with a strap. A very strange low back. The lazy person jumped on his back. He saw his buddy sitting on the edge, waving its cap to him, and waking up as he climbed, the castle gates unlocked, and he saw him. The clock hit 4 times, and the fashion started stirring. When it hit 5, it shifted a rhythm forward. When it hit 6, it paused. When it hit 7, it spun around. When it hit 8, it started to shift back. The lazy guy yelled and struck him, but the beast reversed slowly, and it hit 9 clocks. The guy then attempted to slip off, but excellent hands reached and kept him from every side of his strange animal. One by one, in the castle windows, the lamps came out. It hit a clock of 10. The crab walked backward, backward, once. However, the crab has retrograded. 12 hit the clock. The big gates closed, and the fortune castle was shut to a lazy person forever. To this day, nobody understands, and none cares what became of him and his crab. But the good work was embraced by the Fairy of Fortune, and was happy to stay in the castle. And she has always been his friend and helped him not only to feel happy, but also to show him how to help other people everywhere he goes. The Little Jackal and the Alligator. The little jackal liked shellfish very much. He always had to walk down the river and chase crabs and such stuff along its shores. There was this particular time when he was out there hunting for crabs. Hunger had taken a better toll on him than he ended up putting his paws into the river without first having a look after a crab. This something that one should never do. Snap! As soon as he placed his foot in the water, a huge alligator that survives in the dirt grabbed his little paws with his jaws right there. Oh dear! The large alligator has caught my paw in his mouth. The small jackal couldn't believe it. He's going to take me down and tear me apart and be his dinner in just a few minutes. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to do what? Suddenly, a nice thought came to his head. I'm going to trick him. So, as though nothing was the matter at all, he put on a very friendly tone and said to the alligator, "Ho, ho, ho, ho! Mr. Alligator, you are very intelligent. You're very smart, Mr. Alligator. How good are you to remove the old bulrush out of my paws? I'm going to hope that you find them rather soft." The aged alligator was tucked underneath the mud, and the bulrush leaves, such that his visibility above him was a blur. He thought to himself, "Pshaw! Sorry, it's my mistake," and so he ended up opening his mouth wide open and letting go of the little jackal paws. As quickly as he could, the little jackal ran away and cried out, "Thanks, Mr. Alligator." He was running away at a very high speed. "You have a kind heart, Mr. Alligator. It was very kind and generous of you to let me go without eating me up." The old alligator was grumbling on his back and snapping his jawbones. However, in his dismay, he was unable to catch him. After the events that unfolded that day, Little Jackal swore to himself that he would keep his distance from the crabs. However, in a week's time after he was caught up with Mr. Alligator, he got a really big appetite and craving for crabs. That nothing else apart from crabs will satisfy his overwhelming urge. His body wanted crabs, and that's what he was going to get. Therefore, he strolled down to the river, being very careful than the last time, watching out for his predator, throwing glances each and every corner as he moved along. The old alligator was nowhere to be seen at that moment, but having learned his lesson the hard way last time, he was not going to risk it. So he stopped and started talking to himself aloud. He said, "If I don't get a glimpse of the little crabs jumping all over the land, then most definitely would be able to see them protruding out of the water. And it is at this time that I will put my paws into the water and grab them. I really do wonder whether there are little fat crabs today in the water. His predator was hidden in the dirt of the river's floor surface, and as he overheard the little animal saying this, he was thinking, "Alas, I am going to deceive him by pretending I am a little crab." And immediately he sticks in his paw into the river, I will pounce on him and make dinner out of him. His plan was to stick out the end of his snout out over the water as bait for the little jackal and wait patiently for his prey. The little jackal took one long look at the river and said to Mr. Alligator, "Thank you, you too kind, Mr. Alligator. You have exceeded my expectations. The kindness is too much. You have gone to the extent of showing me where you lay," and he ran away like the wind. "I'm going to have supper elsewhere." The old alligator was so upset and his mouth had started salivating, but the little jackal was long gone. The little jackal held out of the river for a whole 2 weeks. Then, one day, after resisting as much as he could for all those days, he felt a strong urge to have crabs, even if it was just one, to satisfy the craving that seems never to end. He walked down to the river very carefully as he looked around for any sign of his predator. The old alligator was nowhere to be seen. Nevertheless, he didn't want to take any chance. So, yet again, he went on with his usual shenanigans of talking to himself. As he stood at a very good distance away from the river, it was the only way he knew how to look out for Mr. Alligator. He said, "More than often, when I don't get a glimpse of the crabs at the shore of the river, then most certainly I would see them sticking at the surface of the water, and I would get to see them blow bubbles from beneath the water. The little waves of bubbles do go puff, 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 and then they will also go pop, 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 and with this I am able to know where the little juicy and delicious crabs are, and this will help me to know where to place my claws. Would I be able to see any little crabs today?" The not-so-young alligator lies deep in the mud and the weeds and says this, thinking, "Pooh, that's fairly straightforward than I anticipated. What I will do is simply blow the little crab bubbles, and he will come running and place his paws where I can easily get hold of it." He put his thoughts into action and went ahead and blew a powerful blast, and the bubbles floated in a perfect whirlpool, fizzing and swirling. The little jackal did not have to be told who was behind the bubbles. He looked quickly and ran away. As he moved further away from his friend, he hummed, "Thank you, Mr. Alligator. Thank you, merciful Mr. Alligator. You are the most kind alligator of all throughout the whole world. You have yet again shown me where aren't you just nice to me? I will go and look for my breakfast on the other side of the river." The aged alligator got angry than never before and pulled himself out of the water and onto the banks of the river and crawled with the hopes of getting a hold of the little jackal. But oh dear, he was unfortunate. The tiny jackal had run so fast and out of his reach, dinner was lost once more. Thereafter, little jackal had no plans of going back to the river. It was too risky. Mr. Alligator had put him on his radar. Therefore, it meant no more crabs for him. Fortunately, he was able to discover an orchard rich in juicy wild figs that were so sweet, and he made his rounds to the tree now, and then, without the fear of being eaten, he substituted shellfish for the wild fruits. How the old alligator found this out is still a mystery, and he vowed to use even if it's his last breath to catch the little jackal and have him for dinner. So he set himself to crawl and dragged on the heated land to the orchard of wild figs. There he made out his hiding place using enormous stacks of figs, and hid in the stacks under the largest wild fig tree. The little jackal went to the garden after a while, very excited and carefree, but still very cautious of his surroundings, as he was still looking around. Under the large fig tree, he saw the enormous stack of figs. He thought, I can singularly point out that my buddy, the alligator, is hidden in that pile of stacks. I am going to look into it a little bit more. He stood still as a flag and started talking to himself. This was a little way he knew best to do. The small figs which I like best are the thick, healthy, and juicy ones which fall down when the wind blows, and then the wind pushes them on the earth, this and that way, and so I still believe that the enormous stack of figs over there all have to be bad figs, said the little jackal. The old alligator, hidden away in the stack of figs, thought to himself, I will not concern myself with the suspicions of the little jackal. What I will do is to make this figs roll around, so that he may believe that the wind is moving them. Immediately he sprang up and started fidgeting, allowing the leaves to fly all over, and it was fortunate that his back showed through. The little jackal didn't need to have a second glance. He ran away like the wind from the garden, but while he was running he called back, Thank you again, Mr. Alligator. It's very thoughtful and sweet of you to yet again show me where you are. I am unable to stay back and thank you as much as I would love. Goodbye. The old alligator was ravaged with anger and almost breathed out fire at this particular time. Come rain, come shine, the little jackal will be his dinner. Mr. Alligator made a promise to himself, and after that he put all his mind and effort on the jackpot, while he dragged and crawled towards the house of Little Jackal. He sneaked into the house, awaiting the arrival of the little jackal. Slowly by slowly, the little jackal walked towards his house, hoping and dancing joyfully, accompanied by a carefree attitude, although still cautious of his surroundings. He saw that the land was scratched, as though something large was dragging across it at the present time as he came along. What is this? What could this be? What is this? What is this? He said. Then he saw his house's door crushed and broken on its sides, as if something very large had gone through it. What could this be? He thought to himself. I think I'm going to survey round just a little bit more. He stopped very still as a flagpost and started talking loudly to himself. How odd my small house does not talk to me, he said. He said, What's the excuse, little home, that you don't talk to me? If everything's okay when I come home, you always speak to me. I wonder if my little house is doing all right. The aged predator saw it wise to fictitious he was the small house. Otherwise, he would never have the little jackal inside the house. So he girded up his voice as nicely and said, "Tiny jackal, hello, oh, oh, oh." He was afraid enough for once when the little jackal heard this. "It is the old alligator," he said, "and this time he would definitely eat me up if I don't get a plan, and quickly, at that matter, on how to get rid of him completely. What am I meant to do?" He was thinking really fast. Instead, he happily spoke out. "It is great, little house, to listen to your pretty voice, dear little house, and I'm going to be in with you within 1 minute. Only first I have to pick a few firewoods for dinner," the little jackal said. He then went on to gather a lot of firewood and stacked all tightly on the door and around the room and set them on fire. They all went ablaze until the old herring alligator ate his long-awaited dinner. A girl called Louisa. Once upon a time, there lived 4 young and very beautiful girls in a large empty house in the countryside. Despite them being extremely poor, that didn't stop them to be happy and have the greatest time of their lives you ever heard of, because in everything but the cash they were very wealthy. They chose to be happy and not letting money come in the way of their happiness. Indeed, their father was a wonderful being, very wise, who was truly familiar with amazing and interesting stories to tell, and who never hesitated to tell the lessons behind each and every story he told. The girls found it even better listening to the father than playing. They had such a beautiful and joyful mom, a kind mother who always had time for her kids. Even when she was tired, she was able to assist them in carrying out their chores. And she will also look out for them when they played. What more can a kid ask for? The barn was pretty big and fit for all kinds of plays. As they say, when children get to have enough playtime, the brain develops into a beautiful gem of goodies. The country was full of dark, shadowy forests, flower fields, and a river, and a large barn was there. Louisa was the name given to one of the girls. She was a beautiful and energetic young girl, and forever so masculine. It was almost like a routine for her to run through the woods in the forest without dripping a sweat. She hardly got tired. And if that's not enough, she carries a smart and splendid brain in her tiny head. She has a passion for learning to gain more knowledge, and her thoughts all day long are always exciting and interesting. Louisa was a bright young girl who was fortunate enough to realize her hidden potential at an early stage in her life. Louisa was a quiet little girl who loved to keep it to herself. She was obedient and hardly got herself into trouble. It's right to say that she lived by the rules. She had a favorite spot at the corner of the house where she would sit all by herself sometimes and jot down carefully her thoughts in the diary. All the 4 girls owned a diary, but it was her who made the best use of it. She desired and yearned for the moment that she would be able to come up with stories out of her head. At times she could manage to make up verses. This was indeed a stepping stone in her life. At that young age, having to think like that was just out of this world. She dreamed of being a very creative writer, and she didn't hesitate following her heart, even when her little mind was trying to grasp the what's of writing a story. When the 4 young daughters completed their lessons of the day from the father and assisted their mother to sew the torn and the new garments, they were allowed to go out to play in the barn. To them, the most amazing part of the play was theoretical. More than anything, Louisa enjoyed theatrical acts. It brightened up her youthful days, as it was what the heart wanted and craved for. It will be right to say that she always had a longing to get into the barn and let her brain wander around for ideas that are mesmerizing. The barn was like her little sacred space, which brought comfort to her, and every opportunity that presented itself to her to go there, she made good use of it. This meant she had to do the work given by her parents carefully and rightly, so that she won't be denied to go play in the barn. They rearranged the barn and transformed it into a theater, and they called upon the grown-ups to join them so that they can watch them perform the vigorously practiced acts. Actually, they would practice this play with a lot of passion and dedication, over and over, until they felt they are satisfied with themselves. And it is at this point they do get the confidence to let an audience be part of their act. They had a very interesting setting for the play in the barn. Hay-mow was used as a prop for climbing onto the stage, while the adults sat on their seats on the floor. It was an enjoyable moment that brought people together. People came to laugh and enjoy, leaving behind, even if it's just for a moment, their problems. They had one agenda when at that barn, to support the little children with their talent. Jack and the Beanstalk were among the many plays the children acted. The kids had placed the ladder from the ground to the cellar and attached a squash vine on the ladder that resembled the amazing beanstalk. One of those little girls had put on just the right type of clothes to look like Jack, and she pulled it rather well when acting the part. It was amusing and rather unexpected. The little girl lost the beanstalk when it reached that point where the giant was trying to follow Jack in the part of the story, and the monster came tumbling down from the loft. It made up of a huge pile of pillow put together and had a large, ferocious paper on the head and ridiculous clothing. Cinderella was another tale they played. He set up a pretty big pumpkin out of the wheelbarrow, lined with yellow paper, and Cinderella drove away in it when she swung her wand from the fairy godmother. They used to perform another lovely tale. It's the tale of the Pilgrim Process. Have you ever heard of it before? If all this is new to you, then you better look for it and read it when you are able to read well, to have a better understanding of the old phrases. As the ancient pilgrims used to be pilgrim, the little children placed shells onto their hats for a sign, and went back up, and they had apples and nuts to eat in a joyful hometown on their journey, in the hills and trees down the road. She loved these plays, and wrote some of her own so they could be played by the children. However, Louisa enjoyed the company of her mother even more than writing and acting all combined, and as the day went by, this little girl grew into a fine big girl, and she felt really sorry seeing how hard the mother put in her effort to get things done. She was helping around the house with chores, however, nothing really apart from the money that could put away my mother's misery. She needed to buy food, get new clothes for the whole family, and having a grown-up in the house to help here and there around the house would really ease the mother's problems. But money was scarcely available in those parts of the country, and therefore Louisa's mother was not able to get all she needed, and with time she grew weary, and on bad days she got really sick. How much Louisa had suffered over this, I won't know where to start from. At last, while Louisa was thinking of it, she made a pact with herself that her family will be her problem from henceforth. She took it upon her to get more involved in helping and caring for her mother, her father, and the 3 little angels she called sisters. More than anything in the entire world, they meant everything to her. And she set out to put all her energy and effort to work so that she can earn herself some good money. She kicked off her career journey, sewing clothes for people, which she learned well from the mother, and then later on, as she got a little older, she told stories to young champs, and just like what the father did to her, she taught them the lessons behind every narrative she told. And with time, she got a golden opportunity to be writing stories for the papers. To the last coin that she earned, apart from that which she needed to sustain her, the rest of it all she gave to her beloved family. It indeed made a difference in their lives, but Louisa never thought on those lines. All she could see was how little the money was, and felt disappointed in herself for not giving enough. Each and every year, this beautiful soul grew more and more selfless, and she put extra effort into her work with the hope of getting better pay. Since she was a little girl, she enjoyed writing stories very much, and it grew on her even at an older age. Writing stories was best of all her works, but it hardly brought enough money at the table for her family, and the people around her criticized her by telling her she wasting away by putting her eggs in one basket. At last, one Monday morning, the publisher of the paper she was working for asked her to write a book for young girls. And this time Louisa is a blossomed woman. That day Louisa was not herself. She was actually unwell and very fatigued from trying to get ends meet, but since she was a good person, she always said, "No problem, I will give it a try," whenever an opportunity arises, and that's what he told the publisher. "We'll sure do attempt it." Back at home, all she could think about was about the book she was about to write. She recalled her great moments at the large, empty house in the country with her sisters. And boom, that is where the inspiration of the book came from. She decided to put all that into one story. No one was excluded from the book. All from the parents to her small siblings were included. She didn't leave out the difficult and sad moments, just as much as she shared the happy times with her readers. She called it Little Women when she was done writing the book, and sent it to the publisher when it was all set to be reviewed. And, kids, Louisa created a small book that made her an icon and very popular to many. It was so nice, funny, sad, and genuine, like life itself. Everybody wished to read it. Everyone purchased it, and from it she was able to get lots of money. The long-standing wish for little Louisa was fulfilled at long last. She purchased her family a lovely home in the suburbs. She managed to pay for further studies in Canada for one of her young ones. She brought her father's books. Those are really the things that interest him. But the best feeling of fulfillment that topped up and made her really proud is being able to see to it her beloved mother, who was always weary and ill, could now get the well-deserved rest she needed. The beloved mother never did any hard work again from there on, and the daughter ensured that she never lacked the prettiest of things ever again. For this purpose, Louisa Alcott was named Louisa, after which she wrote many lovely books and became one of America's most popular females. But the loveliest thing, I said, is that she so loved her mother that she sacrificed herself to work really hard to offer her mother the best life that she could. The pain of seeing her mother suffer due to lack of funds in the family pushed her a great deal to become the reputable woman she is right now. Her mother's happiness and well-being were all she ever wanted. She was a little girl.